How accurate are glucose sensors for measuring glucose levels in diabetes? Let's find out. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Mark Green here, the Diabetes Diet Guy, talking all things diabetes and healthy living. Now today's video is a topic I see come up all the time in forums. Not that I'm spying on people, but it's good to keep my ear to the ground and stay in tune with the problems that our patients are facing. And one that comes up time and time again is people's comments about their discrepancy between their finger prick test and their glucose sensor. So I just wanted to take some time to explain to you how accurate are these sensors and should we be trusting them ultimately? In order to start answering this question, I need to introduce you to a term. And this term is the mean absolute relative difference, or the MARD score. Now the MARD score, as you can see on the board here, is basically how far away a sensor is from a blood glucose level. Or actually, it's how far away it is from a comparison, which is typically a blood glucose level. But we'll return to this concept a bit later. And it's typically expressed as a percentage. Now, it's generally accepted that if that percentage is below 10, that it means the sensor is pretty accurate and nearly as good as a blood glucose level. Now, the MARD is used for its ease. It's really easily replicated, but it's not without its flaws. And in order to understand how accurate these sensors are, this is what we need to look into. So let's go. The first thing we need to consider is the sample size taken. Each study that looks at this will take a certain number of blood glucose levels. The more they take, as you'll see on the graph that I'm about to pull up, the more accurate things start to get. But different studies will report on different numbers of glucose levels. Now, this isn't necessarily a big factor because, as you can see, the more numbers that you take or the more samples that you take, generally the MARD starts to reduce. So you think it's in studies and companies' best interest to try and get as big a data set as possible. The second consideration is the comparison that is used. So I mentioned about in the intro there that this is how far away a sensor is from a blood glucose level. Not all studies use blood glucose levels. Some will use a venous sample, some will use other comparisons. So a self-monitor blood glucose level tends to be the standard. Now, one thing we need to consider with a self-monitored blood glucose level is a glucometer, which is the machine that you actually test your blood glucose with, has a margin of error, and that is around 10%. So now if we factor in the MARD score, which also says that any given time on average, that your sensor reading could also be 10% away from a blood glucose reading, we could have at any given time on average a 20% variation, which could be quite significant, particularly at higher glucose readings. And this ties in with number 3, which is the MARD is an average. Let me just pull up a graph here from Freestyle Libre, which documents the MARD on each day for a 14-day sensor or a sensor's 14-day life. And as you can see, it varies day to day. On day 1, which appears to be the least accurate, the MARD's nearly 16%. So then add on top your glucometer's margin of error, and you can see that we can start to get wide varying levels of glucose reliability. Number 4 is outliers. So this is the vast majority of glucose numbers taken. But again, if I pull up another graph from Libre, you can see that there are outliers. Now, obviously, with the number of people who have diabetes in the UK and worldwide, there is an awful lot of glucose levels taken. So just on a daily basis, there's going to be a huge number of outlier glucose levels that don't fall within this range of most glucose levels. They're going to be outliers. So if you have a margin of error that's 10% anyway on your glucometer, you also have this MARD score, and then you happen to get an outlier on any given day, you could see how suddenly these sensors appear to be unreliable. Number 5 is human error. So I've seen enough of these sensors put on, and I put on enough myself as well, to see that how you apply them can make a difference. Some people will hesitate when they start to insert, say, a Freestyle Libre, so you don't quite get the insertion that you were hoping for, and therefore that can affect the reliability of the sensor. Other things include like lying on the sensor, your hydration status, or any other disease that might impact how your body's working, like edema, where you're carrying water, excess water in the limbs, in the feet, around the body, in the arms. It can affect how much water is in that interstitial fluid, which is what these sensors are measuring, and therefore it can either dilute the glucose in the bloodstream or concentrate it, so it can make a difference. Number 6, and a really important one, is the frequency of change of glucose levels. MARD appears pretty accurate in a stable environment. So if your glucose levels are ticking along nicely, MARD's pretty safe. However, where it starts to fall apart is when you have rapidly changing glucose levels, which is quite common with type 1 diabetes. You might be adding correction doses, you might have a glucose spike as a result of food being absorbed more quickly than your insulin's getting into your system. By the way, we've done videos on that. If you're interested, check out the type 1 program. But the point is that when you have rapidly varying glucose levels, the MARD isn't as accurate and able to detect that MARD, not able to detect the sensitivity to glucose levels as it previously could in a stable environment. So people with type 1 diabetes have a much higher variability compared to the general population, and crucially, people with type 2 diabetes. And some of these studies that report the MARD will include some patients with type 2 diabetes. So although the MARD might be below 10% in this population, it doesn't then mean it's applicable to type 1 diabetes, which is where the vast majority of people will be wearing the sensors. And last but not least, at number 7, different studies find different MARDs. Now, I'm not saying all these studies are perfect and their quality varies widely, but we have seen MARDs reported of the same sensors up to 21%. So there appears to be a lack of consistency with the MARD scores reported amongst the literature. Now, when we have companies present to us, usually it's their own study. I'm not saying it's any way biased, so please don't think that's what I'm implying. But it is interesting that there are different findings, so we shouldn't just take it as gospel. So then we could have those factors of a different MARD score, margin of error with glucometer, many other factors that might influence it in terms of what we're basing that data on, how that person inserted the device in the first place, what's their status day to day, are they having any other comorbidities, how are they wearing the device, and the list goes on and on and on. And as a result, we can end up with huge discrepancies between these glucose sensors and what you might see on a finger prick. Summary. Now, unfortunately, I don't have an answer about whether or not these sensors are indeed accurate. Having spoke to patients and been in the game for quite a long time, I think they're pretty reliable on the whole. Usually when we're seeing comments online, it's from the minority of people that are having a difficult time. And even with those, and I'm happy to be corrected, probably most of the time they're working just fine. However, the discrepancies reported are very real things, and it's something that we do hear fairly often. So there's definitely something to it, and hopefully this video goes some way to explain why that happens. It doesn't mean that they're inaccurate, it just means there are reasons at hand as to why we might be seeing these discrepancies. As it stands, we still say, if in doubt, rely on the finger prick, but I suspect as technology improves, and actually it's something I've seen reported in the literature, there might be a crossover point where the sensors actually become more reliable than the blood glucose levels, which then brings up another question, because if we are comparing the sensors to blood glucose levels, but the sensors are more accurate, then how do we start to compare these two? So actually, this is going to be an area of development, I think, and as these sensors improve and we have new iterations of them in the future, it will become a much more interesting space. And that's it, guys. We hope you found it useful. If you did, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button so you can see when we post more videos and help us get up that YouTube algorithm. If you want more information about diabetes, head over to diabetesdietguide.com. We have free blogs, or if you need an extra helping hand, we have consultancy services where we'll work with you to get on top of your diabetes or your healthy living regime. Or if you're looking for some weight loss tips, we can also help with that on a one-to-one personalized basis. Anyway, we'll leave it there and we'll see you in the next video.